Good evening, America, and welcome to the Thursday edition of Just the News, No Noise. I'm your host, John Solomon, reporting to you from a very busy Washington, D.C. today. Explosive news all around this country. Just a few minutes ago, the Justice Department says it indicted that Ukrainian informant who alleged that Joe Biden got a $10 million bribe as part of this deal with his son's Burisma corporate interests in Ukraine. He's accused of misleading the FBI in that indictment. And that's not even the biggest news of the day. For several hours, fireworks in a Georgia courtroom as Nathan Wade and Fani Willis had to disclose the nature of their romantic relationship. And under enormous grilling, the judge had to repeatedly reprimand D.A. Willis for not answering questions or being combative, not following the decorum that he expects in his courtroom. We're going to show you a little bit of that later on and talk about that. And meanwhile, a criminal trial set for the first criminal trial of President Donald Trump also on the horizon. For that, we're going to turn to my amazing co-host, Amanda Head. She's got a lot of headlines, including that very important March 25th date. Amanda, welcome.
That's right. Yeah. Good evening, John. And in some other legal news up in the Northeast, former President Donald Trump was back in a New York courtroom, this time joining his legal team, who was arguing to dismiss the hush money case. Now, you remember the judge ended up denying Trump's motion to dismiss and said jury selection in the trial will begin on March 25th. That happened a few hours ago. Now, keep in mind, as for right now, the trial would be held in Manhattan, where the current 2024 GOP frontrunner only won about 12% of the vote. So with that said, there could be a request put into the court for a change of venue. Now, meanwhile, down in D.C., there is a new Department of Veterans Affairs proposal to start giving urns and memorial plaques to the families of deceased veterans. And it's under major scrutiny. The new rule would allow the interment of cremated remains within a private residence or an above-ground setting. But those whose cremated remains are buried in a cemetery would also not be eligible for the urn and plaque. Now, this change could mean that loved ones are prevented from being laid to rest with their spouse, as the rule would prevent cremated remains from being buried with a body, as if our VA doesn't have enough wrong with it and enough issues. Let's add this to the laundry list of items. So we'll have to see if the proposed rule is adopted. But meanwhile, John, Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer issued another flurry of subpoenas for Biden family and associates. Bank records, it sounds like. What's he looking for now?
Yeah, look, I think he's looking for the money trail, like he said on this show on Tuesday. He's following that money and wherever that money went. How much did Joe get? Did the grandchildren give money to Joe? Did other disbursements come in from other foreign interests that we don't yet know about? All of that is on the table. And after exhausting voluntary ways to get the information, Chairman Comer now is using the power of the subpoena. He said he was going to do it earlier this week, and he did it. Yep. Among those are records for James and Sarah Biden's financial documents, as well as some of the associates, Eric Schwerin, Guangwen Dong, and Mervyn Yan. So we're going to see a lot more in the days and weeks ahead, but that was a big development today and something the chairman predicted right here on the show. Now, another big development occurred earlier this week in the great state of West Virginia. You may have seen this story on our website at justthenews.com. The Attorney General there, Patrick Morrisey, well known on this show, said he thinks it's time for Vice President Kamala Harris to invoke the 25th president. Why not? Because the Justice Department prosecutor said he didn't have his marbles. He couldn't be prosecuted because he had such a bad memory. You remember that, right? Well, we're very lucky to be joined by the man who started that conversation, General Patrick Morrisey, right now. Sir, good to have you back on the show.
Hey, John and Amanda, it's good to join you again. And there are a lot of great things going on in West Virginia. So we urge all of your viewers to come visit.
We love it. You're a neighbor to my home state of Virginia. We go to West Virginia often, so we love it. So I want to ask quickly, there's been a lot of controversy, a lot of discussion, but I think you got to the heart of the matter, which is if Joe Biden's not competent enough to have criminal liability for the keeping of his documents, is he capable of being president? You wanted to push that question onto Vice President Harris. Tell us what happened.
Absolutely. So I think many Americans know what happened last week with the special counsel report. It was an absolute damning report of President Biden, and it certainly did not declare him innocent. It basically indicated that they wouldn't go after him because they didn't think they could convict him and show the necessary mens rea because he was an elderly man and he may have some mental infirmities. In other words, he can't remember, and therefore they didn't think they'd be able to convict him of a crime. So when you hear about that and you realize that he's mentally infirm on one hand, and therefore they're not going to be bringing criminal charges, they're not going to go forward with impeachment, you start to really wonder and say, okay, If that's the case, then how on earth does he discharge his duties as president of the United States? Either you're mentally infirm and you don't get charged, but then you don't serve as president, or you have cognitive capacity and then you face the music from Attorney General Merrick Garland and you still remain as president, at least until the impeachment process concludes.
Yeah.
Mr. Attorney General, while I think that your opinion is highly qualified and reputable, the Vice President, Kamala Harris, might not feel the same way. So therefore, she might not be entitled to take up your opinion and actually move forward with any type of 25th Amendment. But I think that there are other people around her who might be echoing the same sentiments after what we saw last week. Do you think that might be the case?
Look, I think so. I don't know how you can read the special counsel report or, quite frankly, see Joe Biden in plain view without knowing that his mental capacity is diminished. And I think right now, Joe Biden has the burden to demonstrate to the American public that he is capable of continuing to serve as president. And look, this is a situation that's been growing for some time. I'm not the only one to point this out, but it's very serious. Imagine we have an international crisis. What's going to happen in that particular moment in time? And that's why I raise it. Certainly, from my perspective, it's not desirable to have a Biden or a Kamala Harris as president. But I think we have to focus on the Constitution and the importance of having someone who can serve as commander-in-chief. And while I may not care for Kamala Harris's politics, the reality is that this president, if you believe the special counsel's report, that he's not in a position to serve anymore. So that's why I asked the question, and I'm hopeful this is going to generate a national debate about the inconsistency between you're not able to serve for purposes of the criminal prosecution, but you're certainly very capable to be president. That's wildly inconsistent, and that has to get resolved.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And we're going to see a version of this on March 12th in the House, because that's when Robert Hur, the special counsel, is going to testify. I'm sure that question is going to get a lot of asking in that very particular day. So I want to turn to another big issue, because you have fought for American energy independence and for common sense regulations. Your work led to the landmark lawsuit, West Virginia versus EPA. Another thing just happened. After telling us Joe Biden wanted to free Europe from Russia's grip of energy, and wanted to do things to reduce carbon in the economy, in the environment, which, by the way, natural gas does. He all of a sudden said no more LNG exports. Why did he do that?
Well, look, it's hard to understand the rationale behind the Biden administration when it comes to their energy policy, because it seems that they're trying to shut down American energy independence. And I know we've talked many a time on your show in terms of the policies of the Biden Green New Deal, how problematic it is. But we wrote a letter, and we co-led that letter along with Kansas and Indiana and Louisiana, pointing out how problematic it was to just, without any authority at all, cut out these export permits. I'm in a state that really cares a lot about natural gas. We're the 5th largest producer of energy in the country. So when you have an administration that arbitrarily eliminates the ability to export, that hurts jobs right here in West Virginia, and it hurts jobs across the country. So that's why you saw so many states reach out and weigh in. And I think it's just yet another effort on the part of this administration to have a radical policy, put Green New Deal, get rid of all fossil fuels. It's just ridiculous on its face, but we're pointing this out to them, and this could be a prelude to some other legal action.
Yeah, that's important.
Interesting. Sir, forgive me because I'm not up to date or well versed on the entire docket for the Supreme Court this year. But I do believe that a statute that we have talked about on this show often, the Chevron doctrine, might be revisited, and that could have a whole slew of effects across the board. Can you tell us about that?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a big case that's pending right now. It was argued just a few weeks ago, the Loper case. It's actually a fascinating case because the administration was going after these fishermen and indicating that they were required to carry these government monitors on their boats and pay for them at the same time, even though that was not clearly spelled out in the statute. So there was a legal challenge to that, and my office actually led the state-based amicus brief. We're questioning this deference that the courts have given to the federal agencies since the 1980s. It's been a huge problem. And a lot of times when people talk about the swamp and the administrative state, it's just kind of a buzzword. But really what it is when the Congress or the courts give an inordinate amount of power to these federal agencies, and those agencies then try to seize even more power and act without authority of Congress. That's what's happening here with Chevron deference. That's what's happening in this Loper case. So we wanted to weigh in, and a lot of groups have weighed in as well, that Congress needs to be plain in its language, clearly delegate authority to the federal agencies, and not just say, hey, if it's a tough matter of law, you need expertise, we're going to let you make the decisions. There has to be authority that comes from the legislative branch. And I think that the more we can message that, the better off we are, because that gets us back to good constitutional governance and that law that's consistent with our founders.
Yeah. And so I think a lot of people look and they realize the administrative state has been reined in a very big way in the last couple of years, starting with West Virginia v. EPA, then the student loan. But then they see Joe Biden turn right around and start to do the same things again. At some point, there seems to be a flashpoint where there's going to have to be a political consequence, or the administrative state will just ignore the courts. Are you concerned that there's some ignorance to some of the principles and letter of these rulings thus far?
Look, I think you're exactly right. Obviously, West Virginia v. EPA was one of the biggest separation of powers cases in a generation, and it really stood for a pretty basic concept. Congress should make the law, and that the executive agencies can't just seize it when it doesn't belong. You can't reorder the nation's power grid, or you can't move everyone to mandatory electric vehicles by 2032. You can't do massive industry-shaping economic decisions without the clear authority of Congress. But we are worried that the Biden administration and even some courts are not following it. So it's going to take a lot of dedication on the part of the state attorneys general, on the part of Congress. I think this Congress needs to do even more oversight, focusing in on how the Biden administration is overstepping its bounds. But this is something that's actually applicable to all political parties. Everyone needs to watch the growth of the federal government. It's gone way too big for its britches.
Yeah, good point.
Sure has. I love the use of that word, britches. Sir, we know, we talk to many West Virginians who love you. Your work speaks for itself. You are seeking a different job. You've got a big day coming up on May 14th, I believe. Your campaign, that's the primary for that day. Tell us about it. We got about 45 seconds.
Absolutely. No, I think things are going very well. As many of your viewers know, I'm running for governor of the state, and I think my background as Attorney General, taking on federal overreach, the deep state, far left woke ideas, really has made me uniquely qualified. I'm the only proven conservative running for governor, and I'm hopeful that West Virginians will see that experience and know that I'm the guy that's going to be able to lift up our standard of living, drive educational attainment, and be the warrior that stops all the insanity going on in Washington, D.C. So I appreciate the opportunity to be with you. Grateful for your time.
Yeah, thank you, General. It's great to have you on. We'll be sure to get you on soon. A big election around the corner. We'll be keeping a close eye. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, we're going to have a little bit of news. Congressman Andy Biggs, he always brings a lot of surprises with him, and we'll have him from the great state of Arizona right after these messages.
Welcome back, everybody. I don't want to waste any time because our next guest has been an instrumental voice on House Oversight and Judiciary Committees. He's once again stepped up as a House impeachment manager in the case and trial being made by House lawmakers in the Senate against Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. He is our good friend from Arizona, Congressman Andy Biggs. Congressman, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, John and Amanda. It's good to be with you.
Yeah, good to be with you.
Sir, our audience might not know what it takes to be an impeachment manager, the preparation, the time that it takes to go into that. But if I know anything, with Congressman Andy Biggs, you are not showing up empty-handed. I know there's a lot of preparation on your part. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so for me anyways, it's going back through all the records and documents that we might have. It's going back through all the public statements made by Secretary Mayorkas. It's also going back through all of the depositions and sworn testimony he gave before the Senate and the House. And it also, quite frankly, is going to go back to the very first time that anybody got him to come to Congress, which was when I got him to come to the Border Security Caucus, and the statements he made there. So there's a lot. You review the statements, Then you have to review the data and statistics that we have. Then you also have to know the law. So you got to make sure that we can make a compelling case on high crime and misdemeanor, the definition of that. And I think we can on all counts, using his testimony, the data, the reality of what's happened, plus what the founders intended when they said high crime and misdemeanor.
Yeah, pretty important stuff. Sir, I know you're on a short time. I just want to get reaction to something that just came out a few moments ago. We mentioned at the top of the show, the alleged 1023 informant that made the claims of a bribery scheme with the bribes, charged with making up the story about the Justice Department, David Weiss. A lot of it is still about Ukraine, but this one's going to probably be taken off the table, no?
Yeah, but there's a couple things about it. Don't forget, this is the same cat that was going to give a sweetheart deal to Hunter Biden, where nothing bad would happen to Hunter Biden for all of his crimes. That's number one. Number two, basically everything stays the same. The 1023 guy, informant, who, by the way, was vetted and considered a truthful informant for many years for the FBI, all of a sudden they're going to go after him. But the bottom line is this. All the other facts surrounding the money transactions, the money laundering, the firing of Shulkin, the Ukrainian AG, all of those things come together, and they are not changed by the prosecution of the 1023 witness. And then we don't even know what Weiss may or may not have. I will just tell you this. An indictment means very little. It is the conviction that means the most.
Yeah, that's a great point.
I know Democrats will use this to sully anything that has come out with respect to the Bidens in Ukraine. Sir, I just want to make sure that we can still keep you. Do we need to let you go?
I need to go. I'm sorry.
That's
just checking the time.
You're doing the people's business. That's all right, sir. We're going to let you go.
You absolutely are.
We'll catch you up. We'll catch up with you real soon. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. Sorry to go.
That's okay, sir. Good to have you on. All right, man, I want to stay on that for a second because I think there are two very important issues, and Congressman Biggs struck on one. The FBI was sold this guy was credible. Now, all of a sudden, 4 years later, they don't think he's credible, right? And I want to point out that there is a recent record of this with the FBI. They thought that Danchenko, one of the main informants in the Russia collusion case, was credible, and then all of a sudden we found out he made stuff up. Christopher Steele, they had good reason to distrust Christopher Steele, and they didn't properly vet him even when the CIA came to the FBI and said, hey, this guy's got to be revalidated. He's hanging around with too many Russian oligarchs, and they didn't do that. One line of questioning that I'm certain is going to come up is the FBI this bad now that they don't know how to vet people and they're calling credible people not credible and not credible people credible? I think that's the first thing. The second thing is, Andy Biggs just said it right. All right, you take this guy out. Here's what you still have. Hunter Biden got the job. Joe Biden made a speech in Ukraine that benefited the company. He fired the prosecutor pursuing the company. And when the State Department considered the company, Burisma, corrupt, not only was Hunter Biden doing something with him, Joe Biden went and had dinner with Vadim Pozharsky, one of its top executives, right in the middle of the corruption scandal. That doesn't change anything in this case.
Yeah. You know, if I have to place a bet between this being a Danchenko scenario where he's credible until he isn't, or this being the binary of that where he is credible and this just seems to be another element of a protection racket for Joe Biden. I mean, this is David Weiss. This is the guy who handed out that sweetheart deal that caused many Americans who actually read the meat of it, their chin to hit the floor because it was so incredibly soft and easy. So if I had to place a bet between the two, I would say that this guy probably is credible. But you know, we're going to find out more and more. But John, you know, the sad reality is that we are hearing so much out of the intelligence community, whether it's the FBI, and now we've got this John Brennan, Gina Haspel CIA notebook story coming out about, you know, Five Eyes agency spying on 26 Donald Trump associates. And when it comes to the intelligence community in general, Americans just hear story after story, instance after instance of not only a corrupt intelligence community, but an organization and a group of people who are willing to corrupt themselves to protect who is important to them.
Yeah, No, I think that's right. I think the other thing, and I wish we had more time with Andy Biggs, is the DA we saw on the court stand today, Fani Willis, is not the sort of DA that I think would engender a lot of confidence about public trust. A woman paying in cash, having an affair with someone, renting a room from another one of her subordinates, if I understand the circumstances of the friend who started the day off. And Andy Biggs has got a legislation he's working on. I think he's calling it the Willis Act after Fani Willis, which would say no more federal funds going to the DA in Fulton County until this stuff gets cleaned up. I think when people step back, and they're going to have to watch this video, it was really mesmerizing testimony today, but you just can't imagine that the chief person in Atlanta charged with upholding the law is basically talking about, oh, yeah, I did that. There really wasn't any contestation. She tried to obfuscate, like, you accused me of something here, and I'm like, well, we're asking you about this. But at the end of the day, it didn't feel like the type of prosecutor that Atlanta voters will want when they learn all about this. But maybe pulling federal funds could be the first act of accountability.
Yeah, I mean, this judge was having absolutely none of it. And
That's right.
you and I were talking about earlier, he even had to excuse himself because I think that he was just about to explode about all of it. You know, I wonder what's to come and what's to come for her future on this case specifically. She'll be fine because we know that everybody fails up in Washington, whether it's the Washington of Georgia or the Washington of Washington. So she'll be fine. But, you know, there are a number of mechanisms in place by which a prosecutor can be removed in the state of Georgia. And this is one of them. But if she is removed from the case, if she steps down from the case, I mean, she's probably going to be replaced with someone who is probably going to be as virulent and anti-Trump as she was.
Well, listen, the other possibility is the judge decides this case has been so tainted he's going to appoint from the bench a special prosecutor. That's another option that we'd have to keep an eye on. We have to see what the law says about that. But that has happened in prior instances where the conduct of a government prosecutor has come into question. So there's still several more days of work on this, and it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. But my goodness, I just kept thinking, wait a second. This is supposed to be the person who upholds the law in Georgia and didn't seem to have any awareness about the appearance or conflict issues that public officials promise to follow when they take the oath.
Yeah. And by the way, there is another mechanism as well that, love him or hate him, Governor Brian Kemp signed into law, I think it was last year,
that's
where
right.
a prosecutor can be removed from their position for not fulfilling their statutory and constitutional responsibilities. So that's there as well. But I think they would probably have to wait until after the case because it might appear political. If you're a Democrat, it doesn't matter. But if you're a Republican, then you don't want that to be the case. All right. John and I have to take a very quick commercial break, but we're going to be back on the other side of these messages with more Just the News, No Noise, and Florida Congressman Greg Steube. He's got a lot to say, including talking about President Trump and his run. We'll be back.
This President's Day, honor the legacy that shaped America with AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens. At AMAC, they celebrate the courage and leadership that built our nation. In honor of our President's Day, enjoy their exclusive sale. Become a 5-year AMAC member, just like me, for just $35. That's right, $35 for a 5-year membership. As a member, enjoy benefits tailored for mature Americans, resources, exclusive discounts, trusted news, games, sweepstakes, and a powerful voice for your rights. Join us in honoring our nation's leaders. Visit amac.us/justnews for this special President's Day offer during the month of February. Seize the opportunity to be part of a community valuing experience, wisdom, and principles that make America strong. Head to amac.us/justnews and secure your 5-year membership for just $35 today. AMAC, better for you, better for America. Happy President's Day from the Association of Mature American Citizens. Go visit amac.us/justnews.
Welcome back, everybody. Great timing for this guest tonight because about 2 weeks ago, the House passed the Tax Relief for American Families and Workers Act of 2024 by a vote of 357 to 70. And while the U.S. Senate considers the House bill or makes their own changes to the tax credit provisions, one of the major successes of that legislation is with great thanks to our next guest. Since 2021, FEMA has declared over 300 disasters impacting nearly 90% of our country. 45 states have experienced a covered disaster in the last 3 years. So whether it's the train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio, the ongoing California wildfires out here, or the recent historic hurricane damage in the Sunshine State, Florida Congressman Greg Steube is delivering for families, small businesses, and workers after his sponsored legislation titled the Federal Disaster Tax Relief Act was passed in that package that was sent over to the Senate. Congressman, we love having you on the show. This is so important. It affects so much of our country. Can you talk to us about the meat of this provision in that tax relief bill?
Yeah, and it's affected every single person that lives in my district, from Hurricane Ian to Hurricane Idalia. Just about every Floridian was affected by our hurricane since 2020. And as you said, you did a great job synopsizing what this disaster relief does. Over 45 states are impacted. Every single disaster that's been declared, federally declared disaster since 2020 will be included. You will be able to deduct your expenses as it relates to those disasters from your taxes. This is money that's going direct in the pockets of everyday Americans, every single person that's been affected by wildfires, hurricanes, tornadoes, train derailment, you name it. Every single person in Southwest Florida has been affected by this. I was hoping to get it done before the extension deadline of February 15th, but obviously, as we sit here, that's obviously not happening and passing the Senate. So I encourage every person, once this bill becomes law, to file an amended return for your tax year, whenever that disaster was, to be able to take advantage of real savings straight from the IRS that'll go right back to you.
Yeah, so important, so common sense. Actually, remarkable that it hadn't been addressed this way before. It's very important stuff.
Yeah.
So I want to turn to something else, because earlier this week we had the former Israeli ambassador to the United States who said, listen, it's time for the United States to kick the UN out of New York, given all the revelations we've learned about the UNRWA workers and a possibility of a Hamas headquarters beneath one of their facilities. You're taking action to make a reality a part of that, which is to defund UNRWA. Tell us why this is such an important moment.
Yeah, we know now that they were having tunnels, Hamas tunnels underneath their headquarters in Palestine. Now there's been reports where over 100 Hamas terrorists were trained by UNRWA. Why in the world are Americans sending their taxpayer dollars to an organization like this that is literally funding and training terrorists? I think we need to stand for the American people and stand for the safety and security of the American people, and not have our tax dollars going to fund terrorism across the world. So I filed a bill. There's a companion bill in the Senate that would not allow our tax dollars to be funded to them, and reroute that money to finish the border wall construction.
That's a big deal.
You know, and I think about the hundreds of billions of dollars that has come from the United States to the UN over the years, maybe even in the trillions. Dollar for dollar, how much is this going to save the American people in the form of it going towards the border wall? Do we have any idea how much, even on an annualized basis, that we are pumping into that could go to building the wall?
Yeah, it'll be millions of dollars. And you're right. Like, this administration, the Biden administration, opened up $6 billion to Iran, did away with sanctions so that they could sell oil. They're making hundreds of millions and billions of dollars. It is then funding terrorism. Right before Hamas attacked Israel, there was like $300 million that the State Department under Biden administration sent to the so-called Palestinian Authority, that money was used to actually attack our ally Israel. So this administration has a history of giving money to terrorist organizations, abandoning $80 billion worth of military equipment in Afghanistan so the Taliban can run around with our M4s and our Blackhawks and all of our equipment. They have an America Last agenda. Trump, when he was president, did away with the funding to UNRWA because they knew that it was going to these type of organizations. As soon as Biden got back in, he reopened the money going in. I think Congress needs to stand for the American people and end the funding to these different organizations.
A big moment. I think people in many countries are going to be interested to see the outcome of that. So I want to keep on the topic of the border. We are hearing reports that Speaker Johnson tried to get Joe Biden to meet and negotiate on border security, and Joe Biden's turned him down. Can you tell us what you know about that and what message that might send to the American people about the administration's commitment to the border?
Yeah, this is Joe Biden's open border. 10 million illegals have come in, over 300 known terrorists on the terrorist watch list. I mean, if you look at the numbers, it's like over 30,000 Chinese Communist Party members, over 30,000 Russians, Afghans, Iranians. They're all coming in through the southern border. And these people aren't coming here because they want to live the American dream. They're coming here because they want to destroy our country from the inside. And this administration is letting it happen. Don't let the talking points from the White House and the Democrats that the House is holding up funding to be able to allow for more border agents. That is a complete and absolute lie. We have passed H.R. 2, which would do all of the things at the border that would put in place some of Trump's policies, remain in Mexico, reform the asylum process, that have to happen to prevent the atrocities we see happening at our southern border.
Yeah, so important.
Yeah. And Congressman, we used to just hear about cartel-related crime in border cities and in sanctuary cities and sanctuary states, but it's starting to bleed out into the rest of America. And yesterday we had on Brandon Judd, and we were talking about the effect of cartels and the fact that now, we used to just have conversations about Sinaloa and MS-13, but now you actually have cartels who are in concert working with other cartels from other nations, like from Venezuela, that are actually teaming up. Have we effectively lost control? The Biden administration seems to have just completely relinquished control in all different categories to the cartel.
Yeah, they've lost control. Look at the crime skyrocketing in all of our big cities. Look at the results of these open border policies where gangs are running relentless across our country and organized crime coming across the border. It's my understanding that nobody crosses the southern border without the cartels and Mexico being involved in this. And you have all of these unvetted individuals coming into our country, murderers, rapists, terrorists, who wish to do us harm. If he genuinely cared about the safety and security of American people, he would shut down the border. He has the ability to do it today. He had the ability to do it 3 years ago, and he reversed all of Trump's policies that opened us up into the current conditions. So again, don't let this talking point from the Democrats and from the White House that it's the Republicans in the House fault that we don't have border security. He could change it with the stroke of a pen out of the White House today or 3 years ago.
Yeah. No doubt about it. Sir, you're part of a very important process of evaluating whether President Biden should be impeached, and there is a pattern that is now emerging. Joe Biden meets with Jonathan Lee in Beijing. Jonathan Lee opens up an investment fund with Hunter Biden. Joe Biden meets with the Chinese national chairman of CEFC China, Chairman Yi, and all of a sudden $3 million flows into Hunter Biden's business accounts. He meets with a Kazakhstan guy at a lunch, and the next day Hunter Biden gets a car or money for a $140,000 fancy car. It seems as though Joe Biden played a very clear role in his family's business, and that is he was the rainmaker. When he showed up, people started writing checks. Is that the pattern you're beginning to see?
Yeah, and we've known that all along, and now we're getting corroborating witness testimony that that's exactly what happened. Thankfully for the subpoenas that have been issued to the financial institutions, we now have financial evidence of the money that was laundered from the Chinese Communist Party or Russian oligarchs or the Ukrainian government and entities through the Biden family members, his brother James Biden and Hunter Biden. And we know that obviously Joe Biden was the impetus behind all of that. I filed an impeachment resolution last year. I felt like we had enough evidence at that point in time to move forward with impeachment of this president based on his complete corrupt behavior, not just in the White House, but as vice president. Everything was for sale. You wonder why we're weak on China policy right now? It's because he's compromised. You wonder why they want to give billions and billions of dollars to Ukraine? That's because his family made millions of dollars off the Ukrainians. There's no coincidence to what's happening. And finally, we're getting witness testimony and financial evidence of the crimes that he committed while vice president and that he acted on while president. Some of these meetings happened while he was president in the White House. And these are the type of things that thankfully now are coming before the American people as evidence and testimony. I was thankful that we got Tony Bobulinski in here to testify to some of this activity that happened. And we need to move forward with impeachment proceedings. It's what the American people want. And if we don't do it, justice will not be served.
Yeah.
Congressman, you have always been a great supporter of the America First agenda and the early supporter of President Trump in his run for the 47th president. Florida GOP has officially endorsed him. Is it time for all Republicans to get behind him?
Yeah, I endorsed him almost a year ago now. I felt like there's only one person that can walk in on day one and fix all these atrocities that we just talked about that are a result of Joe Biden, and that's President Trump. I've always supported him. I endorsed him early on, and I'm honored to do it. I believe he's the only person that can walk in there and change the disastrous course that our country is on today.
Yeah, no doubt.
Congressman, I think you're exactly right. And so many Americans see so many crises happening in practically every sector of American society, and they see him as a wartime president, and I think that's what's warranted. Thank you so much for being here tonight, sir. We'll see you again soon.
Yeah.
Welcome back, America. We've got an amazing guest with an awesome product that I want you all to get to know about. After all, it might even benefit you or someone you know. Right now, and over the course of the next few months, the IRS will be mailing millions of pay-up letters. That sounds intimidating, doesn't it? It can be an intimidating notice for sure, and a process to go through is not very fun. You're not alone, because Tax Network USA is standing ready to use their war room strategies to help and see if you're one of the millions of Americans the IRS will waive a penalty for. Here to discuss this more with me for this sponsored segment is the Vice President of Tax Network USA, Joshua Hanna. Joshua, good to have you back on the show.
Hey, John, thanks for having me.
It's a great honor. All right, let's remind everybody what great work your team does. There's a lot of new notices going out. It's going to be a tough year for anyone who's in arrears at the IRS. Tell us what your team does.
Our firm really helps taxpayers put together statements of circumstances and going through all the guidelines for resolution on IRS debts, whether it's an offer in compromise, penalty waivers, affordable payment plans. We help them from start to finish in settling their back taxes with the IRS or state.
Wow.
Awesome. How does the process work? I mean, I imagine that folks reach out to you and then they have to submit certain documentation to you. What does the process look like?
The first steps of the process is really understanding the tax issue itself and putting together a strategy on a private call with the taxpayer and understanding the scope, nature, and magnitude of all the involving issues. Once we understand their situation, we'll be able to tailor a strategy that will put them in a situation in getting this resolved in as little as 4 months, 6 months, or as long as a year, and putting this behind them for good. There are some documents that they would need to sign. There's an IRS form that gives our firm the authorization to communicate with the IRS, request transcripts and documents, and also relay information to them for settlement.
So, Josh, this is a little bit of a different year. There's always a certain number of people that are in arrears and have issues with the IRS. But right now, the IRS is really doing a crackdown. Right, it's millions of Americans, and they look like they're not going after big wealthy people. They're going after small business owners, individuals, with middle class and working class incomes. What's going on, and why do they charge or go after the little guy more than the big millionaires?
Because the big millionaires and billionaires have tax attorneys. That's really what they have that the average Joe doesn't have. With Tax Network USA, we put together affordable plans for anybody to have seasoned tax professionals and tax attorneys, CPAs, to represent them throughout this process without breaking the bank.
Yeah, that's important.
So when it comes, John mentioned these letters that people could be getting, and I mean, there is a terrifying emotion associated with opening the mailbox and seeing the return address label from the Internal Revenue Service. Who are the people out there who might be getting one of these letters?
Any individual or business that's holding a balance with the IRS, that's unpaid, will receive a letter for sure. And people and individuals and businesses that don't have their tax returns all up to date. The IRS actually has a process called a substitute for return. It's a division that makes the IRS lots of money, because basically if you're not filing your return to avoid tax court, the IRS will file for you. Okay, and they're obviously, that's like the worst person to file your tax returns. You don't want the IRS filing for you ever. Their imbalances are almost always incorrect, extremely inflated, and you're not getting deductions, write-offs, expenses that you would, because they don't have that information. So, if you have unfiled returns, the first thing you want to do is get all those returns filed and have our firm basically put the IRS on notice that you're handling this, so they don't file for you and collect against you on those inflated adjusted balances.
Yeah, because once they get there, the work to get out of it's even harder, right, Josh? You're really in a hole at that point. I want to ask one thing. I think a lot of people think, I can navigate this. I'll make the call to the IRS. You guys have decades of experience on your staff of people who do this, and there is a right way, and they're the right people to call and the right things to do. Knowledge is power when you're in a conversation with the IRS, correct?
Yeah, you don't want to pretend to know the tax code. You know, you don't want to pretend to be an attorney or a tax professional. You want somebody to be either present or handling this for you. Okay. And that's where we come in. We make sure that everything is relayed perfectly with the statement of circumstances, and the IRS can only collect what they're legally required. You know, when you get on the phone, or a taxpayer gets on the phone without a representative, the IRS acknowledges that phone call as if you're waiving your rights.
Right.
And you never want to be in a situation like that with the government. You want to keep your rights preserved and really get all the benefits and programs that the IRS has available that they wouldn't really disclose to you if you're waiving your rights, obviously.
Right. Man, so
Yeah.
important.
You mentioned at the top talking about, the interest and penalties that can compound and compound and compound. How crushing can those get on someone once they're imposed?
It could be as high as 25%. I mean, especially if the balance is, fabricated by the government because they filed for you, then it really stacks up. It's piling up. I call it junk tax. You want to make sure that you're paying the penalties that you're required to. If there's a deal where we pay a partial payment on those penalties and they forgive the rest, or you're paying solely to the principal, you want to make sure that you don't pay all that junk tax that they assess.
It's a big savings, and it's important to do there. All right, Joshua, so we got about a minute left. Tell us the process. Someone gets, we're going to send them to a very special number you set up as part of our partnership. What should they expect when that call or that first contact occurs?
They should expect a private phone call with a tax professional. It's about a 10 or 15-minute call. We really get in depth on what is needed to understand their case and what's needed to put together a strategy to resolve their tax debt. Then they'll get a basic service agreement, nothing really lengthy, straightforward service agreement, and an IRS power of attorney that allows us to represent them throughout this whole process.
That's a pretty valuable experience. And you've done something special for all of our viewers as part of our partnership, part of sponsorship. Folks, if Tax Network USA is simple and they're willing to help you, all you got to do, visit tnusa.com/justnews, tnusa.com/justnews, or call 1-800-245-6000, 1-800-245-6000. Joshua, thank you so much for what you and your team do. We're going to take a quick commercial break, folks. We'll be right back. America, the information I'm about to share with you might change your life. Right now, there's a silent epidemic affecting 100 million Americans that nobody wants to talk about. It's called fatty liver. We throw everything at our livers: cholesterol, alcohol, toxins, heavy metals. That's why so many of us have a sluggish fatty liver that makes us gain weight and lose energy. It even affects our sleep quality and may be a risk to our heart health. That's why it's important to start protecting your liver right now, today. You can do so with Liver Health Formula. This natural drug-free supplement contains 11 clinically proven botanicals that help you recharge and protect your liver. This company already helped more than 2 million fellow Americans. You can try Liver Health Formula risk-free today. How do you do that? You're even going to get a free bottle of omega-3s with your order. Head on over to getliverhelp.com/justnews. Once again, that's getliverhelp.com/justnews to get your liver supplements and free gift right now.
Welcome back, everybody. We only have a few minutes left, but I want to touch on some of those important things that we gleaned from our guests tonight in our interviews. But before we do that, John, I just want to remind everybody to tune in to our special CPAC coverage. Next week, Real America's Voice is going to have top to bottom, left to right coverage, and it's going to be fantastic. And you and I are going to be hosting our show from there.
And on Monday, we got a CPAC flyover. Going to be fun. Matt Schlapp's going to be joining us. We've got Craig Shirley, who's going to give us the history of CPAC and its relationship to Ronald Reagan. Great way to kick off one of the most exciting weeks in conservative politics. So I can't wait. It's going to be good to see you here in Washington as well, Amanda.
It's going to be good to be. It's going to be good to be there, Lordy. I can't keep my thoughts straight. It's a good thing it's nearing the end of the week. All right. So I wanted to hone in. So I'm going to pick with Attorney General Patrick Morrisey.
Yeah.
A lot of important stuff from that interview, but the very first thing that we spoke to him about was this letter that he sent on Tuesday regarding or an appeal to Vice President Kamala Harris invoking the 25th Amendment. I would like to be a fly on the wall when she opened that letter and read it, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, listen, it's a great point for him to make, because I think many of the voters in West Virginia probably have this concern. Heck, we now know that Robert Hur had this concern. He's a senior member of the U.S. Justice Department, a special counsel. I'm going to put a date on everyone's calendar, circle March 12th, because that's the date that Robert Hur is supposed to go to Congress and describe why he said the things he did, what he found, what the documents were, why there's concerns. I can't wait for that date. I think that's going to be one of the most combative and politically theatrical hearings we've had in a long time in Washington. So just put that one. By the way, people who know Robert Hur say he's a very able debater. So he gets on the witness stand. He's going to be an interesting witness, I think. But Morrissey started it. And I think May 12th, we're going to get a second dose of why the prosecutors felt Joe Biden was so mentally diminished.
Yeah, well, debating and arguing happens to be baked into the cake of the job description as an attorney and a prosecutor and
That's
all
true.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's move on to Congressman Andy Biggs. And I want to hone in. We didn't have a chance to talk to him about this, and we'll get back to some of his remarks in a moment.
Sure.
But the Willis Act regarding federal funding of prosecutors down in Georgia and the repayment of federal funds already used.
Yep.
John?
Yeah. Now, listen, I think today people got a troubling look of how this prosecutor operates, the mores and ethos that she had, the lack of awareness to the perception that what she was doing was a conflict of interest, and then her demeanor in the court when the chief law enforcement officer of your community has to constantly be reprimanded by the judge and threatened with, I'm going to strike your testimony. I think it left a bad taste in the mouth of a lot of citizens in Georgia. The question is, what's next? First, the judge gets to rule. Then will Georgia Governor Kemp intervene? And then will the bar in Georgia intervene? This is a long-running story. It doesn't just affect the Donald Trump case. Her behavior here raises questions about the conduct in all of the cases her office has overseen. That's why there's supposed to be a high standard of ethics for prosecutors. It didn't feel today from the case that was made and what Fani and her lover, or former lover, I guess, Nathan Wade said, didn't feel like an office that had the highest standards. But we'll see what the judge says.
Yeah. All right. Let's tip off of that breaking news. Alexander Smirnov, the confidential human source featured in that now infamous FT 1023. He was overseas and was arrested at Harry Reid, as you and I spoke about, ironically, but also very appropriately, Harry Reid International Airport in Las Vegas. Here's the thing. If Democrats can use this as a talking point and say that this besmirches and muddies everything regarding the Biden relationship with Ukraine, then I would say that the same case applies with respect to the prosecution of Donald Trump down in Atlanta. Toss them all out. This one's ruined. Toss them all out.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. But I understand the argument. It makes a lot of common sense. I think that a lot of people listen. I do think that the FBI is the biggest loser in this because they vouched for this guy. It vouched for Danchenko. It vouched for Christopher Steele. I know some other informant cases where there are now buyer's remorse. How can the world's premier law enforcement agency be this wrong so often? Now, again, Mr. Smirnov's going to get his day in court. He's still holding to his story, and we got to see all the evidence. He's presumed innocent. That's very important. But I do think there's a second issue. No matter which way this case goes, that premier law enforcement agency, the one that want to give the FISA powers to again, it has a really horrendous record over the last 2 or 3 years, maybe over the last 6 or 8 years. And that can't be lost in this. This is FBI, as Kevin Brock talks to us often about, it's an agency in distress. And I don't think enough attention is being given to that. That's why we got to stay on it, Amanda.
Yeah, and you and I talk about all the time how it's the seventh floor. Yep. The rank and file agents of the FBI, day in and day out, for the most part, do their job. If this was a game of Tetris, we should just wipe out the whole seventh floor and start from scratch. People who love America and care about the privacy of American citizens and people who care about following the letter of the law. All right, everybody, that's it for tonight. We somehow got through this Thursday evening, and I know that we're going to look forward to doing it again tomorrow night right here at the same time on the same network. But until then, have a great night. We're going to see you tomorrow. Grant Stinchfield is going to take you through the next hour of headlines and big news. See you tomorrow.